At the beginning of such relationships, communication often feels refreshingly clear, almost disarming in its simplicity. Words seem to carry their natural meaning, and conversations flow in a way that feels safe and predictable. You ask a question, you receive a direct answer, you express a feeling, it is acknowledged. There is a sense of emotional transparency that creates comfort and trust. But over time, this clarity begins to fade, not dramatically, but in subtle, almost unnoticeable ways. What was once direct becomes layered with ambiguity. Responses grow less precise, statements start to carry double meanings, and conversations that once felt grounding now feel disorienting. You may begin to notice that simple discussions no longer lead to simple conclusions. Instead, they spiral into confusion. A straightforward question might be met with a vague response or even turned back on you. You start hearing phrases that seem intentionally unclear, leaving room for interpretation rather than offering understanding. It becomes harder to pinpoint what is actually being said versus what is being implied. This shift is not random. It gradually conditions you to question your own interpretation of reality. As this pattern deepens, you may find yourself replaying conversations in your mind, trying to decode what was meant. You analyze tone, word choice, and timing, searching for clarity that used to come naturally. The ease of communication is replaced with effort, and what once felt instinctive now feels like a puzzle. You might even start asking for clarification more often, hoping to restore that lost sense of straightforwardness. But instead of receiving clarity, you are often met with frustration, dismissal, or further confusion. This is where the dynamic becomes psychologically exhausting. You are no longer just participating in conversations, you are working to understand them. The emotional energy required to keep up increases, and yet the certainty you once had continues to decrease. Over time, this creates a quiet but powerful shift within you. You begin to doubt whether your expectations for clear communication are unreasonable. You may even start adjusting your own communication style, becoming more cautious, less direct, and more accommodating of ambiguity. What makes this particularly impactful is how gradual it is. There is no clear moment where everything changes, which makes it difficult to recognize what is happening. Instead, the loss of clarity feels like something you somehow contributed to, rather than something that was introduced into the dynamic. And in that uncertainty, the foundation of straightforwardness erodes, leaving behind a communication style that feels unstable, unclear, and deeply unsettling. At some point in this dynamic, confusion stops being accidental and becomes a pattern. And this is where reality itself begins to feel unstable. You may recall moments with absolute clarity, what was said, how it made you feel. Yet when you bring it up, you are met with denial or distortion. You hear things like, "That never happened," or "You're remembering it wrong," or even, "You're making things up." These responses are not just dismissive, they are disorienting. They force you into a position where you must choose between trusting your own mind or accepting someone else's version of events. Initially, you may push back. You might try to explain, to clarify, to hold on to your version of reality. But over time, the repeated contradictions begin to wear you down. It becomes exhausting to defend your own experiences. You start to question yourself, not because your memory is flawed, but because the constant pushback makes certainty feel out of reach. This is how doubt is planted, not through one dramatic moment, but through repeated, subtle invalidations. As this continues, you may begin to second-guess even the simplest interactions. Something that once felt obvious now feels uncertain. You might think, maybe I did misunderstand, or maybe I am overreacting. This internal dialogue becomes more frequent, slowly replacing your natural confidence in your perceptions. The more you question yourself, the more you rely on the other person to define what is real, and that dependence creates a significant imbalance of power. What makes this particularly impactful is that it often doesn't look like manipulation on the surface. It can be delivered calmly, even convincingly. There may be no raised voices or obvious hostility, just a steady rewriting of events that leaves you feeling off balance. Because of this, it becomes harder to identify. You may not label it as harmful, instead you interpret it as miscommunication or personal error. Over time, this erosion of self-trust extends beyond the relationship. You may find yourself hesitating in other areas of life, unsure of your decisions or interpretations. The internal certainty you once relied on begins to fade, replaced by hesitation and self-doubt. And this is the true impact. It is not just about winning an argument or avoiding accountability. It is about reshaping your sense of reality so that you no longer feel anchored in your own truth. When that happens, Clarity becomes something you seek from outside rather than something you trust within. And in that shift, control quietly transfers, leaving you disconnected from the very instincts that once guided you with confidence. There comes a point where words are no longer used to create connection, but their absence is used to create control. What once felt like open communication begins to be replaced by silence, but not the kind of silence that brings peace or reflection. This silence feels heavy, deliberate, and deeply unsettling. It shows up after a disagreement, after you express a need, or sometimes for reasons that are never made clear at all. Conversations that should continue simply stop. Messages go unanswered. Eye contact disappears. Emotional presence fades. At first, you may try to bridge that silence. You might reach out, ask what's wrong, attempt to repair whatever feels broken. But instead of clarity, you are met with distance. The more you try to engage, the more the silence seems to expand. And in that space, your mind begins to search for answers. You replay recent moments, scanning for mistakes, wondering what you said or did that caused this shift. The silence becomes a mirror that reflects your own fears back at you. This is what makes it so powerful. Nothing is explicitly said, yet everything is being communicated. The withdrawal itself becomes the message. It suggests disapproval, disappointment, or punishment without ever having to take responsibility for expressing it directly. And because there is no clear explanation, you are left to fill in the gaps. Often, you fill them with self-blame. Over time, this pattern conditions you. You begin to associate speaking up or expressing your needs with the risk of being shut out, so you adjust. You might hold back your thoughts, soften your words, or avoid certain topics altogether, not because you no longer have feelings, but because you are trying to maintain connection and avoid that painful silence. In doing so, you slowly abandon parts of your own voice. What makes this even more confusing is that the silence is often temporary. Just as you begin to feel the weight of it, the connection may suddenly return, without acknowledgement, without resolution. The conversation resumes as if nothing happened. This creates a cycle where disconnection and reconnection are unpredictable, keeping you emotionally off balance. You may feel relief when the silence ends, which reinforces your efforts to avoid triggering it again. But the reality is, this is not communication. It is control through absence. It shifts the responsibility onto you to fix something that was never clearly defined. And as this continues, the emotional cost grows. You are not just dealing with silence. You are navigating uncertainty, anxiety, and the gradual loss of your ability to express yourself freely. As the dynamic progresses, communication no longer serves the purpose of connection or understanding. It becomes a strategy. Conversations start to feel calculated rather than natural, as if every exchange carries an underlying agenda. You may notice that when you try to address an issue, the focus quickly shifts away from the original concern. Instead of engaging with what you are saying, the other person redirects the conversation, often in subtle but effective ways. What begins as a discussion about your feelings somehow turns into a critique of your behavior. This is where manipulation takes a more refined form. Blame is no longer direct, it is repositioned. You might hear things like, "I wouldn't react this way if you didn't," or "You're the one creating problems." These statements are designed to move responsibility away from them and place it onto you. And because they are often delivered with confidence, it can make you pause and reconsider your own position. The conversation becomes less about truth and more about who controls the narrative. At the same time, there is often a pattern of deflection. When accountability is expected, the topic changes. Past mistakes are brought up. Unrelated issues are introduced. The conversation becomes layered and tangled, making it difficult to stay focused on the original point. You may find yourself trying to steer it back, only to be pulled into another direction. Over time, this creates a sense of mental exhaustion. You are not just communicating, you are trying to keep the conversation grounded while it is constantly being redirected. Another element of this manipulation is selective listening. Parts of what you say may be ignored, while other parts are exaggerated or taken out of context. Your words are reshaped in a way that supports their position rather than reflects your actual intent. This can leave you feeling misunderstood and frustrated, as if no matter how clearly you speak, your message is not being received as you intended. What makes this particularly challenging is that it often happens in a way that is difficult to prove. There are no obvious signs of hostility, no clear moments of outright dismissal, just a consistent pattern of conversations that leave you feeling confused and off balance. You may walk away from these interactions questioning how things became so complicated when all you wanted was a simple, honest exchange. Over time, this shifts your role in the relationship. Instead of expressing yourself freely, you begin to anticipate how your words might be twisted or redirected. You become more cautious, more measured, and less spontaneous. Communication loses its authenticity, replaced by a constant effort to navigate a system that was never designed for clarity, but for control. And when you step back and look at the entire pattern, something becomes unmistakably clear. This was never just about miscommunication. It was never about you not explaining things well enough, or not being patient enough, or not trying hard enough. It was about a gradual shift away from truth, away from clarity, and away from anything that could create real, grounded connection. Straightforwardness didn't disappear overnight. It was slowly replaced by confusion, by silence, by distortion, and by conversations that left you feeling smaller instead of understood. And the longer you stayed in that space, the more you were pulled away from your own center. You began to question what you knew, second guess what you felt, and filter what you said. But here is the most important truth to hold on to. Clarity is not too much to ask for. Directness is not unreasonable. And needing honest communication does not make you difficult. It makes you human. The problem was never your desire for something real. The problem was being in a dynamic where realness could not exist without being challenged, twisted, or withheld. And so the conclusion is not about fixing them. It is about finding your way back to yourself. It is about recognizing that healthy communication does not require decoding, defending, or diminishing who you are. It flows with a sense of mutual respect. It allows space for truth without fear. It does not punish you for speaking. It values you for it. When you begin to reclaim that understanding, something powerful happens. You stop chasing explanations that never come. You stop trying to translate confusion into meaning. And instead, you start choosing environments, relationships, and conversations where clarity is the foundation, not the exception. Because the moment you return to your own truth, the moment you trust your own voice again, you restore what was slowly taken. Not just straightforwardness in communication, but straightforwardness within yourself. And that is where your power has always been.